In the rolling hills of rural Kentucky, where tobacco fields stretch toward the horizon and where Appalachian traditions intertwine with modern American life, lived Margaret Thompson, an 82-year-old woman who had spent her entire life working the same 150-acre farm that had been in her family for 4 generations, a property known locally as Hillcrest Farm that had weathered the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and countless economic hardships through the determination and sacrifice of the Thompson family. Subscribe to the channel to help me reach 1,000 subscribers and bring you even better stories. Margaret was a woman of remarkable resilience and quiet dignity, shaped by 8 decades of hard work under the changing seasons of Kentucky's climate, with bright blue eyes that reflected both the wisdom accumulated through years of experience and a growing sadness about the distance that had developed between her and her only son, who seemed to have forgotten the values of family loyalty and respect for elders that had been the foundation of their family's strength for generations. The farm had been her life's work and her greatest pride, a modest but well-maintained operation that had specialized in tobacco cultivation and small-scale livestock raising, providing a humble but honest living that had allowed her to raise her son with strong moral values and a deep appreciation for the dignity of hard work, even though the financial rewards had always been modest compared to the opportunities available in the cities. Margaret had been widowed 15 years earlier when her husband Robert had passed away from a heart attack, leaving her to manage the farm alone with the help of a few loyal neighbors and seasonal workers who had respected her knowledge and determination. Though the physical demands of farming had become increasingly challenging as she had aged and her strength had gradually diminished. Her son, Jonathan Thompson, now 52 years old, had grown up on the farm, but had left for college on a scholarship when he was 18, eventually earning a business degree from the University of Louisville and building a highly successful career in real estate development that had made him a multi-millionaire with properties and investments across several states, including luxury developments in Florida, and commercial complexes in Tennessee, and residential projects in North Carolina. Jonathan had married Catherine, a sophisticated woman from a wealthy Louisville family who had never shown much interest in rural life or in maintaining close relationships with Jonathan's mother, preferring the social circles and cultural amenities of urban life that matched her background and aspirations for continued upward mobility. Their 2 children, Ashley, 24, and Brandon, 21, had grown up in luxury in a mansion in Louisville's most exclusive neighborhood, attending private schools and elite universities, with little connection to their grandmother's farm or understanding of the rural values and traditions that had shaped their father's character during his formative years. For years, Margaret had hoped that Jonathan would eventually return to help manage the farm, or at least maintain regular contact with his family roots. But his visits had become increasingly infrequent as his business empire had expanded and his social obligations in Louisville had multiplied. "Jonathan, I'm getting older, and this farm is becoming too much for me to handle alone," Margaret had said during one of his rare visits the previous year. "I was hoping you might consider moving back, or at least helping me find a way to keep the farm in the family." Jonathan had responded with the impatience of a busy executive who saw his mother's concerns as obstacles to his own priorities. "Mom, you need to be realistic about your situation," he had replied curtly. "You're 82 years old, and you can't keep pretending you can run a farm. It's time to sell the property and move into a retirement home where you'll have proper care." Margaret had been hurt by his dismissive attitude toward the farm that represented her life's work and her family's heritage. "Jonathan, this farm has been in our family for over a century," she had protested. "Your great-grandfather built this place with his own hands. It's not just property to be sold. It's our family's legacy." "Mom, that's sentimental nonsense," Jonathan had responded with the cold logic of a businessman. "Legacy doesn't pay bills or provide medical care. You need to think practically about your future." The conversation had ended with Margaret feeling more isolated and abandoned than ever, realizing that her son had become someone she barely recognized, a wealthy man who had lost touch with the values and connections that had once defined their family. 6 months later, the situation had reached a crisis point when Margaret had suffered a minor fall while feeding the chickens, resulting in a sprained ankle that had made it even more difficult for her to manage the daily tasks required to maintain the farm. When she had called Jonathan to inform him about the accident, his response had been swift, but not in the way she had hoped. "Mum, this proves my point exactly," he had said over the phone. "You can't continue living alone on that farm. I'm arranging for you to move into Sunset Manor, a very nice assisted living facility here in Louisville. It's expensive, but I can afford it, and you'll have professional care." Margaret had been horrified by the suggestion. "Jonathan, I don't want to live in a nursing home," she had pleaded. "This is my home. I just need a little help, not to be put away somewhere." "Mom, you're being stubborn and unrealistic," Jonathan had replied with growing irritation. "I've already spoken with the administrator at Sunset Manor. They have a room available, and I'm arranging for movers to come next week to pack your essential belongings." "What about the farm?" Margaret had asked with desperation. "What about the animals? What about everything your father and I built here?" "I'm putting the farm on the market immediately," Jonathan had announced. "The real estate agent says we can get a good price for the land, especially if a developer wants to build a subdivision. The money from the sale will help pay for your care." Margaret had felt as if her world was collapsing. "Jonathan, please don't do this," she had begged. "Give me a chance to find another solution. Maybe I can find someone to help me, or maybe we can work out a different arrangement." "Mom, I've made my decision," Jonathan had said with finality. "This is what's best for everyone. You'll be safer and more comfortable at Sunset Manor, and I won't have to worry about you living alone in that old house." The following week, Jonathan had arrived with a moving truck and 2 workers ready to pack Margaret's belongings and transport her to the assisted living facility. "I've packed the essentials," he had told her briskly. "The movers will take care of your furniture and personal items. The rest can be donated or thrown away." Margaret had watched in heartbreak as strangers had loaded her lifetime of memories into boxes, treating her possessions as mere objects to be sorted and disposed of, rather than treasures that represented decades of love, work, and family history. "Jonathan, what about my garden?" she had asked as they had prepared to leave. "What about the roses your father planted for our anniversary? What about the apple trees we planted when you were born?" "Mom, they're just plants," he had replied without emotion. "The new owners can decide what to do with the landscaping." The drive to Louisville had been one of the most painful experiences of Margaret's life, watching through the car window as her beloved farm had disappeared behind the hills, knowing that she might never see it again. Sunset Manor had been exactly what she had feared, a sterile, institutional environment where elderly residents had sat in wheelchairs watching television or sleeping in chairs, their days structured around meal times and medication schedules rather than the natural rhythms of rural life that had given meaning to her existence. "Mrs. Thompson, welcome to Sunset Manor," the administrator had said with professional cheerfulness. "I'm sure you'll be very happy here. We have bingo on Tuesdays, craft time on Thursdays, and movie nights on Saturdays." Margaret had looked around at the bland beige walls and fluorescent lighting, feeling as if she had been buried alive. "Thank you," she had whispered, not wanting to cause trouble for Jonathan, even though her heart had been breaking. Jonathan had stayed for exactly 30 minutes, long enough to complete the paperwork and write a check for the first month's fees. "Mom, I'll visit when I can," he had said as he had prepared to leave. "But you know how busy I am with work. Catherine and the kids send their love." Margaret had known that Catherine and the children had probably not even thought about her, but she had nodded and smiled, not wanting to make the situation more difficult. "Take care of yourself, Jonathan," she had said, wondering if this might be the last time she would see her son. As Jonathan had driven away in his luxury car, Margaret had stood at the window of her small room, looking out at the parking lot and feeling more alone than she had ever felt in her entire life. But what Jonathan had not known was that his mother possessed a strength and resourcefulness that 8 decades of farm life had developed, and that his abandonment would awaken a determination that would soon teach him lessons about family, respect, and the true meaning of success that his business education had never provided. The awakening and the plan. 3 months into her stay at Sunset Manor, Margaret had fallen into a routine that had felt more like a slow death than living. Each morning, she had awakened to the sound of institutional announcements over the intercom system, eaten breakfast in a dining room filled with residents who had seemed to have given up on life, and spent her days sitting by the window, watching the seasons change while feeling disconnected from the natural world that had been her life's rhythm. "Mrs. Thompson, it's time for your medication," the nurse had announced each morning, offering pills that had seemed designed more to keep residents quiet and compliant than to improve their health. Margaret had watched other residents shuffle through their days in a haze of prescription drugs and scheduled activities, their families visiting occasionally with forced smiles and obvious relief when visiting hours had ended. "My daughter lives in California," one resident had told Margaret during a rare conversation. "She calls every few weeks, but she's very busy with her own life." "I understand." These conversations had reminded Margaret painfully of her own situation with Jonathan, who had called exactly 3 times in 3 months, each conversation lasting less than 5 minutes and focusing on practical matters rather than emotional connection. "Mom, how are you adjusting?" he had asked during his most recent call. "Are you taking your medications? Are you participating in the activities?" "I'm fine, Jonathan," Margaret had replied, not wanting to burden him with her unhappiness. Everything is fine, but everything had not been fine, and Margaret had begun to realize that she had a choice. She could accept this institutional existence as the end of her story, or she could find a way to reclaim her life and dignity. The turning point had come during a conversation with Rosa Martinez, a 78-year-old former teacher who had been one of the few residents at Sunset Manor who had maintained her mental sharpness and fighting spirit. "Margaret, you look like a woman who's given up," Rosa had observed during lunch one day. "But I can see in your eyes that you're not ready to die yet." "I don't know what you mean," Margaret had replied, though she had known exactly what Rosa had meant. "I mean, you're letting your son treat you like you're already dead," Rosa had said bluntly. "You're letting him warehouse you here while he sells your life's work and forgets about you." Margaret had felt tears welling up in her eyes. "What choice do I have? I'm 82 years old, and I can't manage the farm alone anymore." "Who says you have to manage it alone?" Rosa had challenged. "Who says you have to accept his decision about your life? You're not dead yet, Margaret Thompson, and you don't have to act like you are." That conversation had sparked something in Margaret that had been dormant for months. That night, she had lain awake thinking about her life, her farm, and the son who had abandoned her, and she had made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, Margaret had called her old neighbor, Earl Patterson, who had been helping to maintain her property since Jonathan had put it on the market. "Earl, it's Margaret," she had said when he had answered the phone. "How is the farm? Has it sold yet?" "Margaret, it's so good to hear from you," Earl had replied with genuine warmth. "The farm hasn't sold yet. Jonathan's real estate agent has had a few people look at it, but nobody's made an offer. To be honest, I think he's asking too much money." Margaret had felt a surge of hope. "Earl, I need to ask you a favor. Could you pick me up and take me to see the farm? I need to see what condition it's in." "Of course, Margaret. When do you want to go?" "Tomorrow, if possible. And Earl, please don't tell Jonathan. I want this to be a surprise." The next day, Earl had arrived at Sunset Manor in his pickup truck, and Margaret had signed herself out for a day visit, telling the staff she was going to visit friends. The drive to the farm had been emotional for Margaret, seeing the familiar countryside and feeling the connection to the land that had been missing from her life for months. When they had arrived at Hillcrest Farm, Margaret had been shocked by what she had seen. The house had been locked and empty, with a "for sale" sign prominently displayed in the front yard, but the property had been surprisingly well maintained thanks to Earl's efforts. "I've been mowing the grass and keeping the weeds down," Earl had explained. Couldn't stand to see the place go to ruin. Margaret had walked through her garden, seeing that her roses were still blooming and her apple trees were heavy with fruit. "Earl, this place isn't dying," she had observed. "It's just waiting." Waiting for what? Waiting for me to come home. That afternoon, Margaret had made a series of phone calls that had set in motion a plan that would surprise everyone, including herself. Her first call had been to her lawyer, Henry Morrison, who had handled her family's legal affairs for decades. "Henry, it's Margaret Thompson. I need to ask you about something important. When Robert died, how was the farm ownership structured?" "Margaret, the farm is in your name only," Henry had explained. "Robert had transferred his share to you before he passed away. You are the sole owner." "So Jonathan can't sell it without my permission?" "Absolutely not. He has no legal right to sell property that belongs to you." Margaret had felt a surge of empowerment. "Henry, I want to revoke the power of attorney I gave Jonathan. I want to take back control of my own affairs." "Are you sure about this, Margaret? It's a big decision." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Her second call had been to Dr. Patricia Williams, a geriatrician who had been recommended by Rosa Martinez. "Dr. Williams, I'm 82 years old, and I want to move back to my farm. My son thinks I'm too old and frail to live independently, but I disagree. Could you evaluate my health and give me an honest assessment of my capabilities?" Dr. Williams had agreed to meet with Margaret the following week. Her third call had been to Sarah Chen, a young woman who had recently graduated from the University of Kentucky with a degree in sustainable agriculture and who had been looking for opportunities to gain practical farming experience. "Miss Chen, my name is Margaret Thompson, and I own a small farm in rural Kentucky. I'm looking for someone who might be interested in a partnership arrangement where you could live on the farm and help with operations in exchange for hands-on learning experience and a share of any profits." Sarah had been immediately interested. "Mrs. Thompson, that sounds like exactly what I've been looking for. Could we meet to discuss the details?" Over the following 2 weeks, Margaret had quietly assembled a support team that would enable her to return to independent living. Dr. Williams had conducted a comprehensive health evaluation and had concluded that Margaret was in remarkably good health for her age, with no cognitive impairment and only minor physical limitations that could be accommodated with proper planning. "Mrs. Thompson, there's no medical reason why you can't live independently with appropriate support," Dr. Williams had written in her report. "Your mental acuity is excellent, and your physical condition is better than many people 20 years younger." Sarah Chen had visited the farm and had been enthusiastic about the partnership opportunity. "Mrs. Thompson, this farm has incredible potential," Sarah had observed. "With some modern techniques and equipment, we could develop a sustainable operation that would be both profitable and environmentally responsible." Margaret had been impressed by Sarah's knowledge and enthusiasm. "Sarah, I think we could help each other. You need experience, and I need energy and new ideas. Would you be willing to move into the farmhouse and work with me to restore this operation?" "I would be honored, Mrs. Thompson." Earl Patterson had agreed to continue helping with maintenance and had offered to coordinate with other neighbors who had expressed willingness to assist. "Margaret, this whole community has been worried about you," Earl had revealed. "Everybody thinks Jonathan made a mistake putting you in that nursing home. We'd all be happy to help you come home." With her support team in place and her legal affairs in order, Margaret had been ready to implement her plan. But first, she had decided to teach Jonathan a lesson about respect, family loyalty, and the consequences of abandoning those who had sacrificed for him. On a Tuesday morning in October, Margaret had called Jonathan's office. "Jonathan, this is your mother. I need to see you. Could you come to Sunset Manor this afternoon? It's important." "Mom, I'm very busy today. Can't we talk on the phone?" "Jonathan, I'm 82 years old, and I'm asking you to visit your mother. Surely you can spare an hour." Jonathan had agreed reluctantly to visit that afternoon. When he had arrived at Sunset Manor, Margaret had been waiting in the lobby, dressed in her best clothes and looking more alert and determined than he had seen her in months. "Mom, you look different. Are you feeling all right?" "I'm feeling better than I have in months, Jonathan. Sit down. We need to talk." Ding, and with those words, Margaret had begun a conversation that would change their relationship forever and teach Jonathan lessons about family, respect, and the true meaning of success that his business education had never provided. The confrontation and the revelation. Jonathan had settled into the uncomfortable institutional chair across from his mother, checking his expensive watch and clearly hoping the conversation would be brief. "Mom, what did you want to discuss? I have a conference call with investors in an hour." Margaret had looked at her son, really looked at him, seeing the expensive suit, the impatient expression, and the complete lack of genuine concern for her well-being, and she had felt a clarity of purpose that had been building for weeks. "Jonathan, I want to talk about the decisions you've made regarding my life without consulting me." "Mom, we've been through this. I made the best decisions for your safety and health. You're being well cared for here." "Am I?" Margaret had asked quietly. "Jonathan, when was the last time you asked me what I wanted? When was the last time you treated me like a person capable of making my own decisions rather than a problem to be managed?" Jonathan had shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, you're 82 years old. You fell and hurt yourself. You can't live alone on that farm anymore. I'm trying to be responsible." "Responsible to whom?" Margaret had asked. "To me or to your own convenience?" "That's not fair, Mom. I'm paying for this place, aren't I? It's costing me thousands of dollars a month." Margaret had felt a surge of anger at his response. "So you think money solves everything? You think paying for my imprisonment here makes up for abandoning me? Imprisonment? Mom, you're being dramatic. This is a nice facility with professional care." "Jonathan, look around you," Margaret had said, gesturing toward the other residents sitting in wheelchairs, staring blankly at a television. "Do these people look happy to you? Do they look alive?" Jonathan had glanced around the room for the first time, seeming to actually see the environment he had placed his mother in. "Mom, these people are old and sick. They need care. And you think I'm just like them? You think I'm ready to sit in a chair and wait to die? Mom, you're being unrealistic about your limitations." Margaret had reached into her purse and had pulled out Dr. Williams's medical report. "Jonathan, I had a complete medical evaluation last week. Would you like to know what the doctor found?" Jonathan had looked surprised. "You saw a doctor? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I don't need your permission to see a doctor. I'm not a child, Jonathan, despite how you've been treating me." She had handed him the medical report. "Read it." Jonathan had scanned the document, his expression changing as he had read Dr. Williams' conclusions. "She says you're in good health for your age, but Mom, that doesn't mean you can live alone on a farm. Doesn't it? Jonathan, I've been living on that farm for 60 years. I know every inch of that land, every season, every challenge. What I don't know is how to live in this sterile environment where every decision is made for me." Margaret had pulled out another document. "This is a letter from my lawyer, revoking the power of attorney I gave you." Jonathan had stared at the document in shock. "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm taking back control of my own life, Jonathan, something I should have done months ago." "Mom, you can't be serious. You need help managing your affairs." "You're right, I do need help, but I need help from people who respect me and care about what I want, not from someone who sees me as a burden to be managed." Jonathan had begun to look genuinely concerned for the first time. "Mum, what are you planning to do?" "I'm going home, Jonathan. I'm going back to my farm, where I belong." "Mom, that's impossible. You can't live there alone." "Who says I'll be alone?" Margaret had then explained her partnership with Sarah Chen, the support network she had developed with neighbors, and the comprehensive plan she had created for returning to independent living. Jonathan had listened with growing amazement and concern. "Mom, this is crazy. You're 82 years old. What if something happens to you?" "Jonathan, Something is happening to me right here, right now. I'm dying a little bit every day in this place. I'd rather take my chances living the life I choose than waste away in the life you chose for me. Mom, I was trying to protect you. No, Jonathan, you were trying to protect yourself. You were trying to eliminate the inconvenience of having an aging mother who might need your time and attention. The accusation had hit Jonathan like a physical blow. That's not true, Mom. Isn't it? Jonathan, when was the last time you spent more than an hour with me? When was the last time you asked about my feelings, my hopes, my fears? When was the last time you treated me like your mother instead of like a business problem to be solved? Jonathan had been silent, unable to answer. Let me tell you what's going to happen, Margaret had continued. Tomorrow, I'm checking out of this place. I'm going home to my farm. I'm taking back control of my property, which you had no right to put on the market without my permission. Mom, the real estate agent has already shown the property to several potential buyers. Then you'd better call him and tell him the property is no longer for sale. Jonathan had looked desperate. Mom, please be reasonable. Let's talk about this. Maybe we can find a compromise. A compromise? Like what, Jonathan? Like visiting me once a month instead of once every 3 months? Like calling me once a week instead of whenever you remember I exist? Margaret had stood up, her dignity and determination evident in her posture. Jonathan, I raised you to be a man of character and integrity. I sacrificed for years to give you opportunities I never had. Your father and I worked that farm to pay for your education, your clothes, your activities. We never asked for anything in return, except that you remember where you came from and respect the people who loved you. Tears had begun to form in Jonathan's eyes as the weight of his mother's words had sunk in. Mom, I didn't realize. You didn't realize because you didn't want to realize. It was easier to see me as a problem to be solved than as a person to be loved. Margaret had reached into her purse and had pulled out a check. This is a check for every penny you've spent on this place. I'm paying you back because I don't want to owe you anything. Jonathan had stared at the check in amazement. Mom, where did you get this money? I may be old, Jonathan, but I'm not stupid. I've been managing money longer than you've been alive. I have savings, investments, and resources you never bothered to ask about because you assumed I was helpless. She had placed the check on the table between them. I'm giving you a choice, Jonathan. You can continue to see me as a burden and a problem, in which case this will be the last conversation we ever have. Or you can remember that I'm your mother who loves you despite your mistakes, and you can try to rebuild the relationship you've damaged. Jonathan had looked at his mother with new eyes, seeing for the first time the strength, intelligence, and dignity that had always been there, but that he had chosen to ignore. Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to turn out this way. Intentions don't matter, Jonathan. Actions matter, and your actions have shown me exactly how little you value our relationship. Margaret had begun to walk toward the exit. Wait, Mom, what do you want from me? Margaret had turned back to face her son. I want you to remember who you are and where you came from. I want you to treat me with the respect you would show any person you care about. And I want you to understand that love isn't about money or convenience. It's about time, attention, and genuine care. Can I help you move back to the farm? Margaret had considered the question carefully. You can help by staying out of my way while I reclaim my life. If you want to be part of my future, you'll have to earn that privilege. And with those words, Margaret had walked out of Sunset Manor for the last time, leaving Jonathan to contemplate the lessons his mother had just taught him about respect, family loyalty, and the true meaning of success. The transformation and the new beginning. 6 months after Margaret had returned to Hillcrest Farm, the transformation had been remarkable. Working in partnership with Sarah Chen, Margaret had not only restored the farm to its former productivity, but had actually improved upon it, implementing sustainable farming practices that had increased both efficiency and profitability, while respecting the environmental principles that had become increasingly important in modern agriculture. Mrs. Thompson, the soil tests show significant improvement in nutrient levels since we started the composting program, Sarah had reported during one of their weekly planning meetings, and the organic certification process is moving forward smoothly. Margaret had been amazed by how much energy and purpose she had regained by returning to the life she had chosen rather than the life that had been imposed upon her. Sarah, I feel more alive at 82 than I did at 81, sitting in that nursing home, she had observed. Work gives life meaning, especially when it's work you love. The partnership between the experienced farmer and the young agricultural graduate had proven to be extraordinarily successful. Margaret had provided decades of practical knowledge about the land, the climate, and the traditional farming methods that had sustained the property for generations, while Sarah had contributed modern techniques, technological innovations, and fresh perspectives that had enhanced productivity and sustainability. We're getting twice the yield per acre that the farm produced 5 years ago, Sarah had calculated, and we're doing it with methods that actually improve the soil rather than depleting it. The farm had also become a model for intergenerational cooperation and sustainable agriculture, attracting visitors from the University of Kentucky's agricultural program and other farming operations interested in learning about their methods. What you and Sarah have accomplished here is remarkable, Dr. Michael Foster, a professor of sustainable agriculture, had observed during a visit. You've proven that traditional knowledge and modern techniques can work together to create something better than either could achieve alone. But the transformation had extended far beyond agricultural success. Margaret had rediscovered her sense of purpose, independence, and dignity, proving to herself and others that age did not automatically mean incapacity or irrelevance. I wake up every morning with things to do, decisions to make, and goals to achieve, she had told Rosa Martinez during one of their weekly phone calls. That's what keeps a person young, not expensive creams or medical treatments. The community support that had developed around Margaret's return had also been extraordinary. Earl Patterson had organized a network of neighbors who had taken turns helping with tasks that required additional physical strength, creating a system of mutual support that had benefited everyone involved. Margaret, you've reminded all of us that community means taking care of each other, Earl had observed. Your courage to come back home has inspired other folks to think differently about aging and independence. Local young people had also been drawn to the farm, seeing it as an opportunity to learn about agriculture, environmental stewardship, and traditional skills that were becoming rare in modern society. Mrs. Thompson teaches us things they don't teach in school, had commented Jake Morrison, a 16-year-old who had been helping with farm work after school. She knows how to read the weather, how to understand animal behavior, and how to work with nature instead of fighting against it. Meanwhile, Jonathan had been struggling with the lessons his mother had taught him. For the first month after Margaret had left Sunset Manor, he had been angry and defensive, convinced that she was making a dangerous mistake that would eventually prove his point about her need for professional care. She's being stubborn and unrealistic, he had complained to Catherine. When something bad happens, she'll realize I was right all along. But as weeks had passed without any emergencies or crises, Jonathan had begun to question his assumptions about his mother's capabilities and his own motivations. The turning point had come when Ashley, his daughter, had confronted him about his treatment of her grandmother. "Dad, I visited Grandma at the farm last weekend," Ashley had announced during a family dinner. "She looks happier and healthier than I've seen her in years, and she's accomplishing amazing things with that young woman Sarah." Jonathan had been surprised by his daughter's visit. "You visited the farm? Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew you'd try to talk me out of it," Ashley had replied. "Dad, Grandma is thriving. She's not the helpless old woman you made her out to be." And Catherine had been equally surprised. "Ashley, surely you can see that it's dangerous for an 82-year-old woman to live on a farm." Mom, what's dangerous is treating someone like they're already dead when they're very much alive, Ashley had responded. Grandma has more energy and purpose than most people half her age. Brandon had agreed with his sister. Dad, I think you made a mistake. Grandma seems really happy on the farm, and she's doing things that are actually pretty impressive. These conversations had forced Jonathan to confront the possibility that his mother had been right about his motivations and his mistakes. 3 months after Margaret's return to the farm, Jonathan had finally worked up the courage to visit. He had driven to Hillcrest Farm on a Saturday morning, not knowing what to expect, but hoping for an opportunity to begin repairing their relationship. When he had arrived, he had found Margaret and Sarah working in the garden, harvesting vegetables and discussing plans for expanding their organic produce operation. "Mom!" he had called out tentatively. Margaret had looked up from her work, her face showing surprise but not hostility. "Jonathan, what brings you here?" "I wanted to see how you're doing, and I wanted to apologize." Margaret had studied her son's face, seeing something different in his expression. "Apologize for what, specifically?" "For not listening to you, for not respecting your choices, for treating you like a problem, instead of like my mother." Margaret had set down her gardening tools and had given Jonathan her full attention. "Go on." "Mom, I was wrong about almost everything. You're obviously capable of living independently. You're happier here than you were at Sunset Manor, and you've accomplished things I never thought possible." Jonathan had looked around the farm, seeing the improvements, the productivity, and the obvious care that had been invested in every aspect of the operation. "This place looks better than it has in years. What you and Sarah have done here is remarkable." Margaret had felt a cautious hope. "Thank you for saying that, Jonathan, but words are easy. What matters is whether you've really learned anything from this experience." "I have learned something, Mom. I've learned that success isn't just about money or status. It's about living according to your values and maintaining relationships with people who matter." Jonathan had paused, struggling to find the right words. "I've also learned that I became so focused on my business success that I forgot about the people who made that success possible. You and Dad sacrificed for years to give me opportunities, and I repaid you by treating you like a burden." Margaret had seen genuine remorse in her son's eyes. "Jonathan, I don't want you to feel guilty for being successful. I'm proud of what you've accomplished. What I wanted was for you to remember that success without family connection is hollow. Can you forgive me, Mom? Can we start over?" Margaret had considered the question carefully. "Jonathan, forgiveness isn't something that happens instantly. It's something that's earned over time through changed behavior. If you want to rebuild our relationship, you'll have to show me through your actions that you've really changed. What can I do? You can start by spending time with me. Real time, not just quick visits when it's convenient. You can ask about my life, my interests, my goals. You can treat me like a person whose opinions and feelings matter." Jonathan had nodded eagerly. "I want to do that, Mom. I want to be a better son." Over the following months, Jonathan had gradually rebuilt his relationship with his mother. He had begun visiting the farm regularly, not as a duty, but as a genuine desire to reconnect with his roots and his family. "Mom, could you teach me about the farming techniques you and Sarah are using?" he had asked during one visit. "I'd like to understand what you're doing here." These conversations had led to Jonathan's involvement in the farm's business planning and marketing efforts. "Jonathan, your business experience could be very helpful in developing markets for our organic produce," Sarah had suggested. "We're producing high-quality products, but we need better distribution channels." Jonathan had been excited to contribute his expertise in a way that supported rather than undermined his mother's independence. "I have contacts with restaurants and specialty food stores that would be very interested in locally grown organic produce," he had offered. "I could help you develop those relationships." This collaboration had led to the farm's most successful year in decades, with organic produce sales supplementing traditional crops and creating new revenue streams that had made the operation more profitable and sustainable. "We're not just preserving the farm, Margaret had observed with satisfaction. "We're making it stronger and more viable for the future." A year after Margaret's return to the farm, the family had gathered for Thanksgiving dinner in the farmhouse kitchen, where Margaret had cooked thousands of meals over the decades. "Grandma, this is the best Thanksgiving we've had in years," Ashley had commented. "Everything tastes better when it's made with love in a real home." Brandon had agreed. "Grandma, I'm sorry I didn't visit more when you were at that nursing home. I didn't realize how unhappy you were there." "Brandon, you were young, and you followed your parents' lead," Margaret had replied. "What matters is that you're here now." Even Catherine had begun to appreciate the farm and Margaret's accomplishments. "Margaret, I have to admit, I was wrong about your ability to live here independently," she had acknowledged. "What you've created with Sarah is truly impressive." Jonathan had stood up to make a toast. "Mom, a year ago I thought I was protecting you by putting you in Sunset Manor. I realize now that I was protecting myself from having to think about your needs and feelings. You taught me that love isn't about control or convenience. It's about respect and genuine care." He had raised his glass. "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you. Thank you for showing me what real strength and independence look like. And thank you for proving that it's never too late to learn, to change, and to become a better person." Margaret had felt tears of joy in her eyes. "Jonathan, family isn't about being perfect. It's about caring enough to keep trying, even when we make mistakes." As the family had shared dinner in the farmhouse that had been home to 4 generations of Thompsons, Margaret had reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The abandonment that had seemed like the end of her story had actually been the beginning of a new chapter, one in which she had reclaimed her independence, found new purpose, and taught her family invaluable lessons about respect, dignity, and the true meaning of love. Sometimes, she had thought to herself, the best lessons come from the hardest experiences. And sometimes, the greatest victories come from refusing to accept defeat. In the rolling hills of Kentucky, where 4 generations of Thompsons had worked the land and built their lives, Margaret had proven that age was not a limitation but an accumulation of wisdom, that independence was not about being alone but about being respected, and that family love was not about convenience but about commitment to caring for each other through all of life's seasons. The lesson she had taught her son would resonate through generations. That true success is measured not by wealth or status, but by the relationships we nurture and the respect we show to those who have sacrificed for us, and that it is never too late to change, to grow, and to become the person our loved ones deserve us to be. And that's the end of our incredible story. If you liked this powerful story about the millionaire son who abandoned his 82-year-old mother on the old farm, but she gave him a real lesson, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more stories that will move you and make you reflect on the most important values in life. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching us from in the United States or anywhere in the world? What do you think about Jonathan's decision to put his mother in a nursing home without consulting her? Do you believe Margaret was right to take back control of her life at 82? Have you ever seen situations where adult children treat their elderly parents as burdens rather than people deserving respect? What would you do if you were in Margaret's situation? Do you think Jonathan's transformation was genuine or just convenient? Do you know similar stories of elderly people who prove that age doesn't mean incapacity? What do you think about the partnership between Margaret and Sarah? Do you believe families have a responsibility to respect the wishes of elderly relatives even when they disagree? We love knowing that we have followers in every corner of the country who value the importance of family respect, dignity for the elderly, and the power of never giving up on your dreams, regardless of age. Until the next story that will inspire you and make you reflect on how we should treat our loved ones, and how it's never too late to reclaim our lives and teach important lessons about love and respect.